light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Hu. Today I wanted to offer a few thoughts about what you might call pride celebrations. There are, of course, the gay, lesbian, the GLBT, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, what was originally called the gay pride parades. Before and since, of course, there have been pride parades for any number of ethnicities and groups one could name. Things that relate to a particular nationality, things that relate to a particular religion, maybe a parade or something to celebrate being Roman Catholic, being Protestant, being a member of a particular fraternal club, being Latino, being black, being a woman, being whatever. These different sorts of pride parades. And I recently, it became clear to, or was made clear to me, that I wasn't welcome in a particular GLBT pride parade. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about what are the dynamics that go into that. And in a healthy community sort of dynamic, why would there be pride parades in the first place? Which I guess points back to saying what provokes them. I don't believe there is any effect that doesn't have a cause. For everything that happens, everything that manifests, everything that we see, there's some reason it's there, something it came from, something that prompted it or motivated it to happen. With all of the political demonstrations is another example of that. There's something that provoked them into being, something that inspired them to be there. It's something that inspired someone to respond. When Martin Luther King led the marches for civil rights back in the 1960s, it was specifically because of the abuses. It was because there were acts of oppression being done that he and others were inspired to stand up, to commit themselves to nonviolent methods because they wanted an end to violence, not an answer or reflection of the violence, but an end to it. And so they stood up, and by sheer numbers they marched in, committing themselves to peace. But the reason they did so is because somebody had previously created or perpetrated an injustice that needed to be answered. In the same sort of way, for the perhaps millions of times that GLBT people were told they should be ashamed of simply being who and what they are, in response to that came a point where they had to stand up and say, no, we will not be ashamed of who we are. Shame is something that belongs to negative behavior. When you lie, steal, kill, do something that is destructive to another's life, those sorts of behaviors legitimately deserve shame and guilt. When it's simply a matter of who you are, being a woman, being a gay man, being a lesbian, being a black person, being a Latino person, being an Asian person, when it's simply who you are, there cannot be anything wrong with that. It's not a moral question to be who you are. It's a moral question to be who you are with or without integrity. When you are being yourself with integrity, that to me is good. When you express yourself in ways that lack integrity, it's kind of a self-sabotaging sort of thing where you're the one who's become your own enemy. When you pretend to be something you're not, you're essentially lying to the world around you. And a whole list of problems arise from that. So in trying to answer all this, the more people said you should be ashamed of existing, the more people became motivated to say, no, I will not be ashamed. I will stand up and I will be proud of who and what I am. I will be proud of being gay. I will be proud of being a woman. I will be proud of being black. I will be who I am. The thing that follows that, of course, is to be who you are with as much honesty and integrity and creative contribution as you can. To recognize by looking in the mirror and by talking with others that there are things that you can contribute to the society in which you live specifically because of the things that make you unique. And it is a very ignorant and self-sabotaging community that looks at your contribution and says, we don't want that. But the thing, it's kind of a part of a complex sociological progression. Using the example of gay people simply because it's the one with which I'm more familiar, not because it's the only one, because the dynamics really seem to be about the same. You have an oppressed people who are told to be ashamed simply for being who they are. And they may be given a second-class sort of citizenship. Somehow there are special rights and privileges given to others that they don't get simply because of who they are. They're at one point in American history, an interracial couple, a man and a woman of different races, were not allowed to get married. Their love was not allowed, was not sanctioned, was not permitted. And so regardless of how genuine their love was, they couldn't express it. They couldn't receive any of the benefits that married couples would typically receive. Now, at the time of this videotaping, the debate is going on about whether two people of the same gender can engage in a marriage relationship. I don't know why it should matter to anyone other than the couple. The government facilitates different rights and privileges according to certain classifications. But what classification the people next door have in filing their taxes, in visiting each other in the hospital, in carrying on their own lives in whatever way they want to, I really don't see how that has any impact upon my life at all. To the extent that they do it with integrity, with mutual respect for those around them, that this is who we are, but everyone else is not the same as us. This is who I am, but everyone is not the same as me. Public laws are about those common agreements so that we can all live together with mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, not favoring anyone above anyone else, but eliminating double standards. That what's okay for this person needs to be okay for that person. If it's not okay for both, it may be a bad law to begin with. And if that's the case, then we need to change it and correct it to eliminate that double standard. Coming back to the Pride parades, it was basically that there was larger and larger numbers of people who were willing to stand up and say, I'm tired of being second class. I think I deserve to have the same rights as everybody else, and I deserve to be respected, and I refuse to accept that I should be ashamed just for being who I am, with honesty, with integrity, with respect for others, in ways that demonstrate good behavior, good citizenship. None of these things are dependent upon any particular orientation, race, or gender. These are all things that everyone can do equally, as long as society can agree on what exactly should be done. What is appropriate public behavior? What is appropriately considered private behavior? And making sure that we're not telling someone to keep private those things that other people are allowed to do publicly. That somebody asked me once about this question of flaunting it, and I don't think that heterosexual people realize how much they flaunt their heterosexuality in daily life. And when they look at it from the other side of, in certain cases, I've heard people say that they're okay with gay and lesbian people existing as long as I don't have to know about it or be reminded of it. They should do it in a way that doesn't let me know what their orientation is. Well, that gets a little problematic if you put the same challenge on the other side. To ask somebody that for one day, can you carry on everything in such a way that nobody can tell whether you're heterosexual or homosexual? that there is nothing you are doing that reinforces a heterosexist paradigm. It's much more extensive than people realize. Virtually every television show you watch, you'd have to stop watching television, because 99% of the shows are oriented around heterosexist paradigms. And they behave in ways that affirm heterosexuality. Every smile, every compliment, even the basic mannerisms of opening the door for people. There are things that are so ingrained into our society about what a man does, what a woman does, what a man does for a woman, what a woman does for a man. And there's a lot more people crossing the lines these days, but those basic definitions are still there in an awful lot of places. Consider for a moment if you had to pretend not to be who or what you are because the world didn't approve. So a woman gets up one morning and she has to find a way to get through the day without letting anyone know, or without doing anything that affirms the fact that she's a woman. Well, she can't wear dresses. She has to have a unisex hairstyle. She has to speak in a middle-range voice so that nobody will be able to guess what her gender is. By the time she gets done hiding everything there is about being a woman, it will be a total caricature of what a person should be able to do living their own life. To go to work, to do the job that's required, that could be done equally well by either gender and by any orientation. And yet to do it in a way that doesn't remind anyone of what your gender orientation is, that in a sense conceals a very fundamental part of who and what you are. And the only reason you'd have for concealing it is that this peculiar world in which you live has made it clear that, to put it bluntly, the world can't handle it. The world can't handle the existence of the particular world of whatever context we're talking about, a small town somewhere, or whatever situation, a homophobic company. The world can't handle the existence of gay people. Well, I would say then educate the world. Teach the world how to handle these issues of diversity. Teach the world how to respectfully dialogue with someone of any race, gender, history. When I was going through my master's program, getting my master's degree in theological studies, there was a discussion that came up about the forced relocation of Native Americans and how many people died and so forth. And no one was prepared for me to stand up and say, well, by the way, my grandparents' family were forcibly relocated, and they weren't Native American, and some of my relatives were killed in that forced relocation because they were frightened. A particular sister of my grandmother was frightened and wouldn't quit screaming, and so they shot her because she was being a problem, and the soldiers didn't want to deal with it, so they shot her. We're not Native American, but my point is that there is almost no experience of oppression that is exclusive to any one group of people. Oppression, unfortunately, is something that has various manifestations in virtually every race and every people around the world. There's extremely little where we can say that I'm the one who suffered like nobody else has suffered, and nobody has suffered in the way that I have or my family has. Or suffering is suffering, virtue is virtue, and there's a lot of different ways that the forms by which we express these evolve and change over time. But we err seriously, I think, when we begin to compete for who has suffered more than somebody else. Suffering is not about competition. Suffering is an opportunity to engage in healing, and for a community to rally around its most vulnerable members and say, it's not the identity, it's the behavior that's wrong. When we do a pride parade, it's about a group of people coming together to stand against a particular oppressive behavior and to say, this is wrong and we will not put up with it and it needs to change, and if no one's listening, then we'll march in ever greater numbers until somebody does listen, until things begin to change. The problem for the pitfall, the possible problem for every different ethnicity and group and orientation that has ever engaged in that kind of building is when it gets to a point where things begin to get, well, what one friend called mainstreaming, when people look to what originally started as a group of people collaborating, working together to address a problematic behavior in society or problematic law that is tied to a problematic behavior. What began as people working together to solve a problem, which on an operational level really isn't all that different than people working together to recover from the devastation from a tornado or an earthquake. People who don't know each other understand that they have a common problem and they work together. The problem becomes when that goes on and on and on for a while, and people begin to erroneously, I would suggest, think of that as their identity. We're the earthquake survivors. You didn't go through the earthquake that we went through. We're the gay people who were oppressed by the heterosexist paradigm. If you weren't gay and weren't oppressed in that manner, then you couldn't possibly understand things the way we do. How horribly condescending, and how horribly inappropriate. But in doing that, it begins to form this collective identity that is not really the identity of any one person involved in it. And in doing that, then certain people, either self-appointed or elected by the group, filter to the top, and they begin to say what is the categorical description. This is what Latino people should be. This is what black people should be. This is what gay people should be. This is what lesbian people should be. And if you don't fit into those boxes, you wind up being marginalized by the people who are marginalized, which makes absolutely no sense, but it happens all the time. And so in a way, it's kind of like pushing toward social acceptance. We want to be just like you. We want to be included. We want to, and I would say, wait a minute. It's not about being included on their terms. It's about creating a world that is empowered and educated and able to deal with all the diversity that it includes. It's not about gays learning to live within a heterosexist world. It's about creating a world in which you can be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, heterosexist, intersexual, none of the above. And it all works because the rules are written in a way that doesn't favor any category above another. And the rules are equilaterally enforced. There's no double standards. There's no separation. There's no different classes of citizenship. There's no so-and-so has more privileges than another. So-and-so gets paid more than another. Simply not because of their experience or because of their ability, but because of their gender, their orientation, or whatever. So the real struggle is to avoid a collaborative response becoming a social identity that has a tendency to become exclusive. To say that, we don't want everyone to think we're like you. Many years ago, that was the first argument about having drag queens in gay pride parades. We don't want them to think we're all drag queens. Well, who thought that? Did anyone ever imagine that all heterosexual people were the same? That all women were the same? That all black people were the same? That all Asians were the same? Even in the smallest Baptist church in the southern part of the United States, you can still find people who will get into arguments about things. We do not have the homogeneity and the sameness that these categories seem to assume exists. There is diversity in opinion, diversity in perspective, diversity in experience. Consequently, what we need to build is a world in which that diversity is supported and affirmed and recognized and validated and nurtured. And because it's not about, I need to be different from you, it's about, I am what I am, and I notice that what I am is different, and I would like to make a positive contribution to my community, but my community is not always ready to accept it because my community hasn't learned how to deal with the difference. What words to use, what words to avoid. Maybe there isn't even agreement between myself and another gay person on what word the community should use. Well, then we need to have a dialogue and figure out, so what are we going to do? We need to make our language work, and that may take some long dialogue, some long discussion, some long negotiation for us to come to a fair, equal, integrated solution, something that actually works in practice, something that encourages everyone to make their best contribution, to be their best, to learn and develop themselves in the best possible way, rather than limiting themselves to somebody else's expectation or definition of them. The added problem we have in America, of course, is this the economic obsession with which America in particular is struggling, and in most cases not very consciously. We have allowed money to define so many things, and as much as I understand that parades and marches of whatever description, in our system, the way we've set it up, it costs money for parade permits, for street closures, for all sorts of things. And the problem with that is that when we shift from the purpose for which the parade was created in the first place, that of affirming diversity, that of taking our creativity and putting it out there and saying, no, I will not be ashamed. If it means that I'm going to suffer for it, I'm not sure who said it first, but I agree completely. I'd rather be punished for who I am than rewarded for who I'm not. I don't want to be rewarded because I've been a good liar about who and what I am. And that kind of goes back to what the Pride Parades were originally all about. When people become more focused on the organization and the logistics and the money and the fundraisers and the expenses, though, the first thing that generally suffers is inclusivity, because they may find that, well, we need to raise this much money, and if we put any drag queens in this parade, we're not going to be able to raise that much money because people won't, society hasn't learned to embrace drag queens enough to look beyond their prejudices and beyond their bigotry and support the parade because it's the right thing to do. To support the parade because it's about people having a clear, calm, balanced self-confidence and being able to accept their own beauty and their own the unique contribution that each of them have to make, instead of someone telling them who they should be and how they should contribute, and if you can't do it this way, then you need to, disappear, cease to exist, because the world isn't ready to accept a contribution other than what I've just specified, which is where Sister Who, given the opportunity, would step to the front and say, it's the world that needs to adjust, not the individual. In each case, every time a human being is born, there are treasures that the divine gives to humanity. And if we nurture those treasures and embrace them and support them, wondrous things can follow, and the human race can move toward healing in a much more holistic and integrated sense. Part of that process, though, is recognizing that there are people who grow up in environments that are adversarial, in environments where they are told to feel ashamed of themselves. And in some cases what they need is a rite of passage, some ritual or something that undoes all the hurt and undoes the oppression. And, for as long as it's needed, maybe it won't always be needed, but maybe it will, but to keep tabs on whether this ritual is still serving a need. In my case, the first time I participated in a gay pride parade was the summer of 1989 in Denver, Colorado. And for me, it was incredibly liberating and a ritual of a very specific personal growth to have this opportunity and to be able to stand up and say, yes, that's me. I'm gay. I'm not going to be ashamed anymore. I'm going to live my life with as much honesty and integrity and virtuous character as I can. But part of that is that I will not lie to myself, my family, the world, to anyone anymore about who and what I am. I won't play along when somebody wants to introduce me to this fine young lady and beautiful young lady, but I'm not looking for a young lady as a life partner because of my unique characteristics. And to a lesbian in the crowd, there's no point in introducing this beautiful young woman to an eligible bachelor. That's not what she's looking for. We need to be able to say to each other, whatever makes you happy, and mean it. We need to create those rituals of passage where we can say, ultimately what we're pushing toward is creating a global tribe of humanity. And in tribal societies, there were rites of passage where you passed from youth into adulthood, where you passed from a married state into widowhood. There were rituals that were created to ease these transitions and to help the person to value themselves in the midst of this so that they could make that much better of a contribution to the surrounding tribe. Everyone had to put the unique good within them out where it could be a blessing to their tribe.